Now I'm going to add a bit more functionality to my spreadsheet. Over here under the word ptarmigan, I'm going to write in the word totals, which is a label which explains all the values that are going to surround the rest of the cells. A value is text that you type in that explains what's going on in the spreadsheet. So this row for totals is actually going to add up the number of cars that have been sold as well as their total sales. So under the January column, I'm going to make a new function, which is actually a built-in equation or calculation that comes with the spreadsheet. Spreadsheets like Excel and other spreadsheets have hundreds of built-in functions that automatically do complex calculations for you. This one is pretty easy. It's called the sum function, so some of you may have heard of it. But if I click the equal sign, all equations and functions have to start with an equal sign. I can start writing the word SU, and you can see that I am presented with a list of functions that start with those letters. So I'm going to use the sum function, and there's even quite a bunch of functions that start with the word sum. And this one allows me to add all the numbers in a range of cells. So that sounds great. All functions also begin with a round bracket. So I type in the round bracket, and now I'm presented with this little tooltip that says number 1, comma, number 2. This tells me that the sum function can take a range of numbers separated by commas, and it will add them together. Or I can actually include a range of cells, and that's what I'm going to do most of the time. You'll see that there is a second, number 2 is in square brackets, and that simply means if the number listed in this tooltip, they're called arguments. If the argument is in square brackets, it means I could actually leave it off because it's optional. So I'm actually going to select this range of cells because I want to add the numbers from C3 to C6. So now my equation is sum, round bracket, C3 colon C6. And that is the way to identify a range of cells. I close the round bracket or parenthesis and hit enter, and now that sum is 1155. And I can double check on that just by selecting this range of cells, and right down at the bottom, of course, I can see that the sum was 1155. But now the deal with spreadsheets is I don't want to know what the sum is and then simply type 1155, because the power of the spreadsheets means that if I ever change this to be 80, then I want the number to automatically recalculate. So whatever I change these numbers to, my equations will always be correct and they'll always update. Now, earlier I showed you how to copy equations from one cell to another using copy and paste, but there's a secret technique that I want to show you. When I select a cell, you'll notice that this active cell, which is the cell with the black outline around it, has a square handle in the lower right hand corner. So if I move my mouse over that lower right hand handle, I can find that my mouse pointer changes shape. So now instead of a big white plus sign, it's a little black plus sign. And if I just click and drag and pull to the right, you can see that I am dragging this selection to fill other cells. So I can let go, and now each of these cells is automatically updated with the sum function. That little handle in the lower right is called the fill handle or the autofill handle. So after I complete that operation, I get a tool called autofill options, and I can choose some settings here that I won't really worry about now, but they're pretty self-explanatory. And now I've got proper values, and my equations are correct, my function is correct, so I've added up all the total sales, which is dollar values. So now I probably want to do a little bit of formatting here. I like the formatting of the totals cell, so I'm going to again use my format painter, and I can drag all the way across. Now that's the right background color. But I also want to format this as currency, so here's a little neat trick to generate currency values. Now I've got quite a bit of information here, but I can make it look a little bit better. And sometimes they put totals with a double underline, and that's also in this little drop-down list here. I'm going to save this again. So you can see there are many different ways to do different things in Excel, and I'm just showing you a few that you'll probably use most often. but it's important that you see this variety. You can see also, remember that when I use the autofill handle and I automatically drag these equations across, that the cell references are automatically updated using relative cell addressing. That's important for what we're going to cover next. Now I'm going to use another function. We've used a function called sum, and now I'm going to use the average function to calculate the average units that were sold. Now when I type in average units, it did take the formatting for the cell background from the previous from the column right beside it, but I don't have the red outline, so I will have to fix that later. Under average units, I'm going to calculate the average cars that were sold for the links for the first 3 months. So my equation is going to start with an equal sign, and the average function is AVERAGE. It's not just AVG. That doesn't really work most of the time in Excel. Now what happened there is I had the word average. I had some of the word average, AVER, and the word average is highlighted in blue, and it's the arithmetic mean of its arguments. So I can actually press tab, and it will automatically fill in the item that had been highlighted in blue. So again, this takes a number of numbers separated by commas, but I'm going to use cell references. I can actually just click and drag a range of cells. So my equation is going to say equal average, open parenthesis, C3 colon E3, and then I'm going to close the parenthesis and I hit enter, and now I automatically get the average value of the number of cars that have been sold. Now that says 497.33, but when I calculate average cars, I can't really have 0.3 of a car, so I'm actually going to reduce the number of decimal places, and now I have no decimal places, and it does round up when necessary, and in this case it's just rounded down to 497. Now using our friendly autofill handle, I can click and drag that equation down to the other cells, but of course I don't want to have an average of all of the numbers in row 7, because that won't make any sense. Just like over here under price, I didn't put a sum of all individual prices because that's not a value that I'm interested in. It doesn't have any meaning in my spreadsheet. Now you'll see in this case when I use the average, again automatically we have relative cell addressing in place. I do have these green triangles which are known as error triangles. I can actually move my mouse over this little exclamation point. If you select a cell with a green error triangle in it, you'll see the exclamation point, and when you move your mouse over it, it will tell you, in this case, the problem is the formula in this cell refers to a range that has additional numbers adjacent to it. Well, that's really just too many words that says, oh, you might have missed a couple of cells in your equation. So it thinks I've made a mistake by calculating the average of January, February, and March because I didn't include the price or the total sales. And in this case, I didn't make a mistake. So I need to realize that I can actually get rid of these error triangles. So I'm going to select all of the cells that have this error triangle, and I can actually move my mouse over the exclamation point. But there's a little black arrow that I can click on, and I click on that arrow, and it has some options for me. It tells me that the formula omits adjacent cells, and I could get help on this error, or I could ignore the error. There will be times when you could actually update the formula to include the cells, but if I did that now, I'd have the wrong answer. I actually want to choose ignore error. When I ignore the error triangle disappears, and you'll want to make sure your spreadsheet doesn't have any error triangles on it when you give it to somebody else, because they think you made a mistake. So I have the average units, and I'm going to use my format painter to help clean up some of these cells a little bit. Oh, decimal points. We don't like decimal points. And I also want to have the double underline and the single underline. I'll probably just format all of these after anyway.